Welcome everyone to the inaugural ORD Survey Webinar. So for those who do not know me, I think most of you probably do, but my name is Jonathan Rawlings. Most people call me John. I'll respond to both, but I'm a project surveyor here in Geometronics Group. And I've been thinking about doing this type of webinar for a while now, but was never really able to get it started. I know, and I think everybody knows that East does their webinars pretty frequently, and they've been doing them now for several years, and I always found them very beneficial. And when I was working up in Region 1, oftentimes I never really had the opportunity to attend it because either I was in the field or something else. So I tried to choose a time to do this such that it didn't impact that too much, and those of you that work in the field could attend. So, but again, we are recording it, and it is going to be posted afterwards. I may have to make a few edits to it, but it's going to be posted afterwards if you want to watch it again, or if you know someone that would benefit from it that isn't here, they can watch it as well. And we'll also have the PowerPoints converted to a PDF that you will also have available. And I've called it the ORD Survey Webinar, but at some point, if this is successful, we will transition to other topics outside of ORD. So we'll dive into all of our other software and workflows, maybe with some Cyclone, maybe some Infinity stuff, maybe some TerraScan, TerraSolid stuff as we go on down. And eventually probably get to some right-of-way stuff as well in here in ORD. So. As far as questions go, I would kind of like to get through the material first. So if I say something that doesn't make sense, go ahead and write it down, or you got a question, and then at the end we'll take about 15 minutes and we can go through some questions on that, because I will probably blow right by it if you put it in the chat and the text in Teams, because I'm not looking at that. So the topics that we're going to discuss, so we're going to start off with some topo base mapping stuff. And then we're going to talk about, in this one today, we're going to talk about the Bentley survey format, or SQLite, which is something new we've learned since our initial ORD training. We're also going to talk about zones and filters. Again, something new, and then we're going to talk about how a good workflow for organizing our topo files or your monument files in general, and then our DGNs. And I'm going to go through those three topics and do a couple of demos. And then next week, actually not next week, because next week we're having a TopoDot training. The week after, we're going to dive into the three different types of linear features. We're going to dive into editing survey data. Those two are very linked because the different types of linear features dictate how you can edit it. We'll look at maybe how you perform a drainage study, working with our terrain boundaries, and then our confidence point routine. So David Mole, who's on the team here at Geometronics, has written an executable that works pretty well with the confidence points. And I think that would take us through our second webinar. And then our third webinar, we can dive into some of the reality modeling or Descartes tools, using the sections and some of the things we've found out with using the sections in Descartes, and dive into the ODOT survey ribbon and how that's used, which is mostly going to be used with your 2D mapping. Talk about some deliverables and data acquisition, which is also a tool in ORD that we used a lot in V8i. It's got a different name and it functions a little differently, but it's still there. And then dive into some other TopoDot tools and talk about lagging decorators, which was one of the questions that I got often on the initial ORD survey training, was why is it so slow when I have my decorators on? So there is a fix for that. So we've all had the initial ORD survey training, so I don't intend to talk about the things that we discussed there too much. And if you haven't used ORD much since that training, go back to the manual and look at some of this stuff. So you should know how, or at least have been exposed to, the following things. So you should be able to create a new 3D ORD file. You should be able to create a new survey field book within that ORD file. You should be able to import a field topo file from Infinity, and you should be able to navigate through the survey field book and the details dialog. You should be able to perform some basic edits, so changing codes, linking codes, using your manipulators, transposing linear elements, and you should be able to create a terrain from the survey field book. And I put this in there, number 7 there, start TopoDot and load point cloud files. You may not know how to do that. That's perfectly fine. If you're in the TopoDot training next week, of course, you'll get that. But we'll dive into that a little more in detail on probably the 3rd webinar. So jumping right into some of the new stuff that we have discovered since our initial ORD survey training, and that is the Bentley survey format, or SQLite. So the ORD replacement for our typical En-ROADS FWD fieldbook file is called the Bentley survey format, which has the extension of .SQLite, L-I-T-E. And this is something, again, I discovered after our initial ORD survey class. So unless you've been talking with me much lately, you probably know nothing about it. I know some of you do because I've been helping you out with things. But this is essentially a database file that's used in many other applications. It's not specific to Bentley products like the FWD file was to En-ROADS. And according to the SQLite.org website, it was created in 2000, and the developers intend to support it until at least 2050. So it's been around for a while, and it will continue to be around for a while, for as long as what I think most of us will be working. It is used internationally, but this file is what you will be using to back up your individual field files after you made some edits. And you'll also be able to combine these individual SQLite topo files into one fieldbook to create your base maps and terrains. Another new thing that we've discovered is that if you have duplicate point numbers in your topo files and you're importing multiple topo files into one survey fieldbook, and you use the point renaming tool, which will happen in ORD. If you have duplicate points, you'll see this point renaming tool pop up. It seems to randomly strip away some of the start codes on your lines. It's pretty aggravating to deal with sometimes. However, if you use the Bentley survey format, you can add prefixes or suffixes to all your data, and you can import those duplicate point numbers, and it's going to add that prefix or suffix. So we should see that in a demo. Another new thing in ORD since the initial training is the use of zones. Zones are really just another way to separate and view our data. So they're important when we're working with filters, which we'll talk about next after the zones. And we have set up predefined zones for certain features. So if you look at the bottom left of this slide, you'll see what we currently have set up in this red box. We have all the confidence points on zone 100. We have all of our network points on zone 200, backsite checks and elevation checks on 300, our drainage, our storm drainage on 400, our trees on 500, and our monuments on 600. So these zone values are set in the feature definitions. So when you import data into your fieldbook, the zones will automatically be assigned to that data. So if you have created your ORD file, you've been working on something prior to the zones being in the workspace, which I think was July 1st, then you will not have the zones assigned to your features. So it doesn't retroactively go back and then pick up these zones. So if you wanted those zones in your file, you would have to create a whole new ORD file using the latest ODOT workspace. You can also manually define zones to your features in the survey fieldbook. So this will be important when we're working with filters. If you want to create a filter with multiple field codes, you have to assign a zone to those features and then create a filter based upon that zone. So more on this on the next few slides when we start to talk about filters. And if a zone is not predefined in the feature definition, it is assigned to zone 1. So everything out of confidence points, control, backside checks, elevations, everything out of this list will be assigned to zone 1. And everything that you import from graphics into your Fieldbook is assigned to zone 0. So if you're doing some mapping from the point cloud and you want to import those features from graphics, which is one of the 2 methods for getting those point cloud features into your Fieldbook, it will assign them to zone 0. So the next new thing that we've discovered since our initial training is the use of filters. So filters are not a new concept with MicroStation. En-ROADS had them with the survey style filters in our Fieldbook and the feature selection filters with our surfaces. And filters just allow you to easily turn your data on and off and show the filtered data in the survey details. So we've created a group of filters that will load whenever you use the o.seed files. So they are programmed in our seed 3D, seed topodot, and seed right away 2D seed files. And I am the one that came up with this filter list here. So it's kind of just based upon, I went back and looked at the En-ROADS filters and just used my own experience with what type of data typically needed to be isolated and exported, and then created these filters based upon that. So you can see that the first filter is check shots. And is anyone seeing, can you see my mouse move on here, or do I need to use my laser pointer? There we go.
We can see your mouse.
Oh, okay, all right. Sorry, Lenny, I wasn't able to get comfortable with the additional tool, so I'm gonna have to use this. So the first filter we have there is check shots, and I know this typically is used when working in Infinity. So I typically didn't want to see them in my base map. So I added this filter so that you can easily select them and turn them off, or just select them all and then delete them in your survey details. So, and then working down the list, we got our check shots, which includes our backside checks and elevation checks. We've got our confidence points. So we have a list of all the individual confidence points, and then you can do all of them together. And then we've got all of our control, we've got all of our drainage. We've got our graphical imports. So anytime you use the graphic import from into your survey book, it's going to put all that on zone 0, and you can easily select that data and see what it is. Got one for monuments. We've got all of our trees here, and then we've got all of our utilities under one filter. So as you're working with these and find that you are commonly needing another filter, let us know and we can add it to this list. If it's something that you use often, it's likely someone else is going to need to use it. So just reach out to us and let us know that you're having to make this filter all the time, and we will add it in there. One big benefit of the filters is that with the data filtered, you can isolate it in the survey Fieldbook and easily export it as an SQLite file or create reports and text files. So for example, maybe you're working on the topo files and someone else is working on the right-of-way stuff, but you've got both topo and monuments in your topo file. You can go and select this monuments filter and go to your survey details and export only the monuments to an SQLite file to share with the other person working on the right-of-way side of things. And again, I'm going to do a demo of this in a second. So you can also create your own customized filters. So one thing to note when creating a new filter is that point and linear features must be different filters. So if you notice in the tree structure, we do have these main categories here: check shots, confidence points, and there's data underneath, filters underneath those. For things that are not point features, confidence points are point features, all these are point features. A lot of our drainage is linear features. Those linear features are also made up of points. We also have points in our drainage features, such as inlets and manholes. But these have to be separate filters whenever you create these. And that is why zones are so useful. So you could set up, or we only have one field code per filter as well. I don't remember talking about that yet, but there is only one field code per filter. So if you want to make a filter with multiple field codes, say you want to get all your break lines and your generic break lines in to a file that you want to export for some reason, you can apply a zone to both that break line, the break line features and your generic break line features, and create that filter, isolate the data in your survey details, and export it. So, and this is just an example of what I was talking about when I said you can isolate that in your survey field book. So with the filter for your confidence points checked on, I can right click on this main filters header and select the show details, and only data for that filter will be shown in the survey details. So this is my survey details box over here. Notice my field codes are all confidence points in there. And that's because I right clicked on this filters with only that one filter on and did a show details, and it isolated all that data. So you can then right click on this left column and export the selected items to a Bentley survey format or the SQLite file, or you can do a report on those selected items and go to the report browser to save a text file. So this is what that looks like. So this is the report on selected items option. So this is familiar, just like we would have gotten En-ROADS, slightly different reports, but I've got my list of reports over here, and you'll find that there's 3 different reports that you can choose from that might be useful for confidence points. And if you're transferring these to a spreadsheet for tracking purposes, or maybe to use in VG or some other software, you'll likely want to use this CSV style sheet and then do a file save as to export this to get your confidence points out of the field book. Then you can bring them into your spreadsheet to make your text file for VG or whatever else you're doing. It's the same thing with control. So I used to always keep a master control text file for the project I was working on, and oftentimes we were doing that with the filters and En-ROADS as we initially processed the field data. So you can do the same thing in ORD. So as you're processing your topo files, you can use this control filter to isolate all of the control points in the survey details, and then run a report on those selected items, and then you can save that text file from the report browser. So with this checked on, I can right click on my filters, do a show details. It isolates that in my survey details dialog. I can select it all, right click, and do a report on that. So all those capabilities are still here in ORD, just like we did in En-ROADS, slightly different process. So what if I want to create a customized filter that's not already defined? Well, you can do that pretty easily by just right-clicking on the filters header, so right here, and selecting New. And a dialog box will appear, and you can give it a name and a category. So these main headers are called categories, and then underneath that you have your individual filters. So the category is not necessary, but if you want to use it, it will give you the drop-down tree structure like we have in these existing filters. If you're creating a filter for linear features, you will likely also be creating a filter for point features that make up those linear features. So in that case, you would want to use your category so that those are linked together. And once the name and category are defined, then you can set the filter value here by selecting that ellipses box. And that will open up another dialog. There's a few dialog boxes that pop up as you're working through this. So this dialog box will be empty right here until you select new to define your filter values. So from there, you can select the object type. Over here, you can define, is it a point feature or a linear feature? So we are not going to be using control point observations, setups, or survey traverses because we're not importing raw survey data into here. We're importing process data from Infinity. So depending on what you're doing, you would choose linear or point. You would do your property name. So maybe I want to look for a specific field code or a zone, or maybe I want to look for a certain text in the description. So you can set that here. And you can see there's tons of different options here. So you could even do attributes pair. So if you're bringing in attribute pairs into your data, you could select that and filter based upon that. There's tons of options here to work with. And then you would want to set your operator. So is it equal to, does it contain equal to a certain field code? Does it contain some text? Does it begin with the letter X? Or is it greater than or less than, which might be beneficial for finding features within certain elevations or certain coordinates? The options are pretty wide here for some of these filters. So, and again, you cannot do multiple field codes in one filter. You either need to do multiple filters, each with a field code, or assign a single zone to the different field codes you want to filter. So this is an example of filtering the survey data and looking for signs. So I've got a point feature here. Looking for signs with the word stop in the description. So I've got a point feature. I have my property name would be description because I knew that whenever I created this data, I put all my sign text within my description. My operator would be contains. I could have done equal here, but it probably would not have found any of these because it would have to equal all of that text. So it needs to be contains and then a value of stop. So that is creating a new filter, and then it will, with that selected, it will bring all that up in your survey details. So I'm going to do a quick demo of this. So let me shuffle my stuff. Are there any questions on that?
I got one, John.
Okay.
Just curious, if you create a new filter, does it persist then?
It will persist in your file, but it won't persist in any new files.
Okay.
Yeah. So let me change what I'm sharing here. Oh, there it is. That's pretty easy. Trying to do this in Teams, a little different than Zoom. So I have a file here, an ORD file. I created this using my seed 3D seed file. And we use this, well, I brought this, all this data came from En-ROADS. So we've got a process to bring En-ROADS DTM data into ORD Fieldbooks and then create terrains from them. And that's what this data is. So pay no attention to this stuff right here because it's not how I would like it to be for our workflow, which we'll hopefully get to today. But I have let me go to my survey details here on my point features, and I will show you the zones that are assigned to the different features. So I said earlier, zone 1 is whenever you import data from an Infinity or from any CSV file. Whenever you import it, if it does not have a predefined zone, it's automatically assigned to zone 1. So we've got a bunch of data here that's on zone 1. And I remember when we first got ORD and I was looking at this and I was like, why are there zones? Everything's on zone 1 and how does this work? Eventually figured it out, but I'm going to flip this. So here we've got a zone 500 on this one, and notice it's a tree, coniferous. So if I scroll down through this, there's a zone 100 right here, and notice it is a confidence point surface. I've got a zone 200 here, it's a network point. Zone 200 here, it's a confidence controlled strap point. You can go on up. There's a GPS point under zone 200. So it's automatically assigning those zones based upon the feature definitions. We've assigned those zones in all of these feature definitions. Here I've got a zone 400 for my drainage stuff. I can easily go turn it off. So those are useful for isolating data. So if I want to see nothing but my storm or utilities, let's say utilities, let me go turn, everything is on now. If I go turn it all off with this checkbox, everything goes off. I can turn it back on. Do you see stuff changing? Yeah, you should. So you can see all my utilities. So if I want to isolate those utilities, I can turn off my Fieldbook. Everything goes off. And I can turn on my filter for utilities. And it's going to show everything that is under that utilities filter. So pretty handy if you're just working on utilities and you just want to see that. You know, it's pretty difficult to drill into some of these all point features and select them all so that you isolate it. You could also go work with your levels, but the more I work with ORD, the less I work with levels. So because we have these tools here. If I want to see just my drainage, my storm drainage, I can isolate it that way. So let's say I wanted to create some zones on maybe my generic break lines and my break lines. So I can isolate this data in my Fieldbook. By selecting them, I should have only my break lines and generic break lines selected. Do I not have any generic break lines? So I'm going to edit this zone. Just going to say it's zone 50. Let me go to my generic break lines. Not many of them. Let me edit that zone. Zone 50. Okay. So I've added a zone to those, and I want to create a filter so that I can isolate those in my survey details. So let me go here to my filters. Again, I can right click on this header, go to new. I can give it a name, break line, GBL. I'm just going to call it demo test for the category. Go and enter my filter value using this ellipses. Again, my thing is blank. My dialog box is blank for this filter until I hit new. And then it pops in there. I can tell object type, point features. I'm going to go ahead and do just linear features. I'm going to do it by zone equals 50. And I have to hit tab at the end of this. Notice there's a little pencil here. I have to hit tab at the end of this for it to take. If you don't hit tab, nothing's going to happen. And it won't tell you, hey, you forgot to hit tab. So you just got to remember to do that. I hit accept, puts it in there. I hit accept again. So I have my demo test that I just created, and I'm going to turn all these off and turn all these off, all my data off. So I got my demo test. So that's all my break lines and generic break lines. I can go up here, do a show details, and then it should have all of my break lines and generic break lines in there. Yeah, and there's only one generic break line in there. So, so that's a really quick rundown on zones and filters and how you use them. Let's say I wanted to export this. I could export this. I didn't show this in the slides, but I could export this as a Bentley survey format or SQLite file. Go ahead and do that. Let me save this as my and again, this SQLite file is kind of operating like we would have worked with a FWD file. Go ahead and save that. And for demonstration, we're just going to create a new Fieldbook here. And I am going to import that SQLite file. So I can right click on my Fieldbook 2, go down to import, Bentley survey format. There's my SQLite file that I just exported. I can select that, say open. We'll talk about this. This is what I was talking about with the point renaming. You could add prefixes and suffixes. I don't need to do that for this, but I'm going to hit import. And this data is all off, but I did just import my break lines and generic break lines into here. Points included. Minimize that. So organizing and backups. So that's filters and zones. So going back to that original slide that I had on the Bentley survey format and how you can actually use it in practice. So let's talk about organizing and backups. So files get corrupted, believe it or not. And the organization method I'm about to show you will hopefully make your life easier when it happens. Just this morning, I was talking with someone who had a corrupted file with all of their eggs in one basket to no fault of their own because they didn't know about this. But if they had organized their files using this method, it likely would have saved them some time, maybe getting it all back together. So my recommended workflow is this. So for each topo file you process, you will have a CSV file that you have exported from Infinity. And hopefully you've made some edits in Infinity. You know, you've checked all your heights, set up information. You've maybe modified some field codes, checked your offsets and all that stuff. So hopefully you've done all that. You've exported your CSV file from Infinity. Once you have your CSV file from Infinity, you can create a DGN with one Fieldbook. Both the DGN and the Fieldbook should be named the same as the topo file. And again, I'm gonna let me back up. So I'm not working in ProjectWise right now. Number one, I haven't set up a way where I could do some tests for this. The next one, we will have some of this stuff in ProjectWise. So just stand by for that. But for all my demonstrations, it's not going to be in ProjectWise. So okay, so we've exported our Infinity CSV. We've created a DGN, a single DGN with a single Fieldbook, and that DGN is named the same as the topo file. So if it's 20485T01, you would name both of those the same. You would then make edits to that topo file and then export it using that Bentley survey format or SQLite file with the same name as the Fieldbook. So you would have a DGN file, you would have a CSV file, and then you have an SQLite file. So, and in the picture on the right over here, that's what I've tried to show with this. So we didn't start with T01 on this particular project. It's a project I pulled from Region 1. It probably started with T01, but T01 was probably some type of P40 targets or something like that. So the ones with just topo in it, I've got T02, I've got my CSV file, I've got an SQLite file, and then I've got a DGN for that T02 file. I've then got another file that was done on a different time, maybe by a different crew. It's got a T10 CSV, a T10 SQLite, and a T10 DGN. And I can just keep going down the list here for every single topo file we had for this project. I've created those three files. So once you have a couple of SQLite topo files that have been edited, you can then create your working base map file with your merged fieldbook named the same as your project. So you can import those individual SQLite topo files into your working base map fieldbook to merge everything together. So at the top here in this lower left image, I have my all file that has each of these SQLite files merged into one fieldbook that I can then make edits across the different fieldbooks. So again, if this were project-wise, you wouldn't have this 20485 all DGN in your folder. It would be in project-wise, your eWork 01, most likely, maybe eWork 02, or one of your eWork files is what this would be. So this way of organization is useful if you have multiple people processing or editing files in ORD. So for example, maybe the field crew wants to make some edits to their files and pass it on to someone else for combining everything together. Or also, if you want to be able to reference in the original data prior to grooming into the combined base map, then this is the way to do that. So in your working base map file, you can reference your individual topo file DGNs to see what changes have been made to your final product. So let me do a quick demo of this, but this is really similar. And the way I came up with this method is that this is similar to how I've always handled larger projects in V8i and En-ROADS. Except with V8i, I always made separate FWDs, DTMs, and then microstation models for each topo file, then combine them. But with the civil data in ORD, using multiple models is not, a recommended practice due to you get faulty ORD survey settings with whenever you're outside of the default model. So just to kind of reiterate the process again here, kind of in step form. With ORD, you will create one ORD DGN, and to keep things organized, you should name it the same as the T file you're working with. Within that ORD DGN, step number 2, you can create a fieldbook with the same T file name that you will import the Infinity CSV file into. That was step number 3. And then number 4, you then make edits to your topo file, to your data as needed using your field notes if there's something you didn't get in Infinity. And then when all your edits are done to that topo file, you can then export that edited T file fieldbook using the SQLite format. So, and then you just repeat this process for any other topo files you may have. And then when you're ready to merge all your T files together, you can create a working base map file with one fieldbook that's named accordingly to denote that it's, the working merged file. And then you can then import those individual SQLite T files into the fieldbook and edit across the different topo files as necessary, because sometimes you may need to combine features, things like that. You can then import your point cloud mapping, which most of you are probably aware of the process we have for getting it from Topodot or even from Descartes into a text file that you can then import into your merged working base map. So let me jump into a demo here. So I have, try and get out of presentation mode here. There we go. It seemed like, there we go. Okay. So I have a series of CSV files that I have exported from Infinity for this particular project. So I've got a TO2, T10, T20, T21, so on and so forth. So for each one of those, I'm going to create a new ORD file. So I've already got ORD open in an effort to save a little bit of time here. So I'm going to go ahead and do a new. Stuff's popping up on the other screen. Do a new folder here, demo. So my first file was 20485TO2. I'm going to name it the same, and I'm going to use my seed 3D. Okay, go ahead and save that. It's going to open up here. And I'm going to create a new field book with that same name. Hopefully you can't hear my 2-month-old crying in the background. And I keep getting stuff messed up there. So I'm going to import my Infinity CSV file into there. Do a right click on that fieldbook name, import file. Got my TO2 CSV. And I didn't choose the right format when I did that. I knew I would mess up, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that. Do it again. Right click, import file. Choose my text import wizard file. There we go. Do a TO2.csv. Fit my view. So I've got all my data in here. This is where I could go in and use my filters to maybe export my control points. Maybe I want to export my confidence points to another file. I could go in here and start doing my edits. So I see I got confidence points with a star code on them. So maybe I want to get rid of that. Let me drill into my survey details. I'm going to make a little edit here on those. Let me find my confidence point surface. Those aren't surface. Those are naturals. See, I've got a starting code on those and they should not. I can just get rid of that. Maybe I wanted to add some descriptions on this, these utilities in here. So let me find those utilities. Those are fiber, which is FOP. And drill in here. I've got all these. I know that they're all CenturyLink, so I'm gonna make some quick edits to that. So it's all CenturyLink. Say okay. So I'm good. I made all the edits that I need to make. I can then export this. So I can right click on that fieldbook name, T02, do an export to Bentley survey format. Make sure I'm going to the right folder. And it's going to automatically name it whatever that fieldbook name is. I'm a little bit too picky. I like to have those capitalized, but I can hit save. So I'm done with this. Let's say I've maybe the field crew went out and got another one. I could go do a new file, TO3. Create a new field book. I'm going to import my Infinity CSV file. It's T10. I messed up on that again. T10 is the next one. I can change that. Oh no, I've got some duplicate features. So here I've got, they got the same name, 5509. So for this, I'm just gonna skip it because I know what happened there. And you can look at these differences and see what's going on. We had some stuff get overwritten, but I'm gonna go ahead and hit apply that, apply that, apply that. Fit in my view. So here we had some missing start codes, so maybe I want to go do some start codes. I'm not going to get into editing on this, but that will be the next webinar. But I can make some changes to that. And then I'm going to rename this to T10 just to keep my stuff straight. So I can right click on this, do an export to Bentley survey format. It automatically names it what your field book is, save it in there. Once I've got a couple of those, I'm going to start a working base map. I'm going to go ahead and name this what I would if it were in ProjectWise. So I've got a couple going, so I can now create my kind of merged or all field book in here. Let me go this way. It's a little easier to type these in. And I can now right click on that field book name, do an import, and do a Bentley survey format. And I've got my two SQLite files. I can only do one at a time, so I can do my TO2. It brings up my dialog box. Here I could add a prefix or suffix if I would like. It's going to import it. I can do a fit view. There's my TO2 that I brought in. Notice my edits have stuck. So I had a line going through those confidence points that I didn't need. I think I changed I changed these fibers to CenturyLink with a description. Notice it's still on there. And it ties that data back to that CSV. It does not, it's not linked, but it still shows where that data is coming from, that TO2 CSV. I can then right click on this again, do an import, Bentley survey format, do my T10. Again, it's asking me if I want to add a prefix or suffix. I don't for this. Here I've got duplicate control points, which is what this is. I can go take a look at the differences. I do know that there were some elevation issues on one file on here, so I'm going to skip or overwrite this BMP. So I'm going to say apply, again, another control file where they change the elevation, another one where they change the elevation. So now I've got my T10 data in here, which was up here. And now I can start to make some edits across these different topo files. Notice how this fiber line connected up because they have the same field code name. There's a couple different ways to fix that. I'm not going to get into it much here, but I'm going to go ahead and put an end on this. So that's the general process, and I would continue that on with the rest of the topo files that I've got. So that is the recommended way that I see doing it. I think if you only had one or two files for a project, maybe you wouldn't have to go this way. There's another way that you could use, and I'm not going to have time to get into it today because I want to open it up to some questions. So we'll touch on that at the next one. But any questions? Do you have any questions for me?
Is this mostly just to avoid crashes and backing up work?
You know, I think yes and no. Yes, that's one of the big drivers of it, but it's also just a way to keep your data super organized. You know, there was a crash just recently with a pretty large ORD file. And I think if it had been set up this way, it may have been a little easier to recover. We were able to recover it all, but I think you could have more quickly have done that.
I think this is also a good method when we do have our larger projects where you're going to have a couple of different people working on the different parts, because then they can work independently. You don't have to worry about conflicts of, does somebody have the file locked out or anything like that.
Right.
And it does give you a direct path to be able to put those pieces back together.
Yeah, and it's really important if you've got a field crew that wants to maybe look at their data, and maybe when they look at it in ORD, maybe they make some edits to it and they want to pass it on to the analyst if they're grooming the base map together. Or maybe you've got two people, you got your field crew leader and your tech working on the same project, and one processes one file and one processes another. This is a way you can get everything merged together from that.
So one other thing that I'll ask, I know, I've been working with a few of you on your projects that you're doing. I can't quite tell performance wise when you're bringing the CSV files in or data files in, if it makes a difference whether or not they're on your F drive or if they're on more of a local C drive when you import them to ORD. But something else to think about too is if you are working on your project in ProjectWise, you can store your data files in ProjectWise. They can just be stored as a general field document in the CSV format. The only thing we don't want to store in ProjectWise is the actual DBX files or the Infinity project. And that's because those are database files. They work differently, but once we have the data in CSV, they can be stored in ProjectWise. And then you can import directly from ProjectWise and not have to search for it in a directory. ProjectWise will help you find it that way. So something to think about, something to keep an eye on. So if you're noticing differences on performance when you import data, let us know.
I guess I had a question, John.
Okay.
I noticed in your that image that you had of your file structure, that you also had a DGN. So you're saying basically, there it is. Yeah. So you would have your CSV out of Infinity, your SQLite saved, but to get an SQLite, you have to have a DGN to be able to edit it. Is that why it's in a DGN?
What do you mean? Is that why it's in a DGN?
So you're creating a new DGN to edit your CSV, which then you will export. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. You have to create that new DGN and you have to create a new field book, and then you import your Infinity CSV file, make your edits, and then you can export that field book as an SQLite file. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And then that SQLite file can, be imported back into a different field book or a totally different file, or however you want to work it. So.
Gotcha. What are your thoughts? I guess it would be the same. Maybe there's downsides to it, but to having one DGN, having different field books called your TO, maybe we've talked about this too. Is it also to prevent the crashing, or because you have everything in a single DGN type of deal?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and just mention it right now.
Sure.
That was my second method of organization. So, if it's just you working on a project, if it were me, I would still feel more comfortable with making a DGN for each topo file, making an SQLite file, and then creating my working one and having all of those SQLite files imported back into my working one. But you could have just a working DGN and then have multiple field books. So each field book would have each topo file would have a field book. And then you only import that Infinity CSV for that topo file into that field book. Once you make your edits, you can then save that field book as an SQLite file, and then you would have another kind of working file with everything merged together in there. One of the things, if your file gets corrupted, you hopefully got your SQLites as backups, but you're kind of going to have to start all over here again too, from different things. So one of the benefits of doing it this way is that you are able to see all your data at once. And if you're the only one working on it, this is probably an acceptable way to do it. So as long as you're saving those SQLite files for your individual topo files as backups, but you're still going to have to merge all of those topo files together into one field book to create your terrain from, and your base map.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I could see having multiple DGNs for multiple people working on. I think we actually have a crew that's kind of in that. Each side picked a point cloud, so then they could both work on it. So okay, that makes sense to me. Thank you.
Yep.
And I think the key thing to remember is ultimately all of this data needs to be in one field book. So don't forget that, because we cannot create the terrain across multiple field books. When we say create a terrain, it's going to be created from a single field book. And so that's that real final step. The real TERR DGN needs to have a master field book with all of the data files in it.
Yeah. Yep. All right. I'll go ahead and show this last method of organization since we're right at time, but I'll go ahead and show it. And I think this is probably what most of you are doing. And I don't recommend this. You've got one DGN and you've got one field book, and you're just dumping all your Infinity CSV files into this one field book. You can still back everything up, but you have to remember to save your field book as an SQLite as you're working. So the only way to see the original data after your edits is through the Infinity CSV file. You don't have any way to reference in those individual topo file DGNs. I guess one of the pros of doing it this way is that you can edit your topo files. You can edit across topo files from the start. So you can combine features, but again, you're not keeping a very good record of all your original data as it goes through there. And you can't really have multiple people working on the same project this way very easily. So I really don't recommend doing this. I recommend getting those individual SQLite files for each individual topo file, and then creating a working base map where you can merge it all together. So.
Yeah, I would suggest that, like you have here, this is fine for, 2 or 3 T files. I think that's a personal preference. I might go to a bigger number than that, but yeah, if it's a small project, there's not much likelihood that keeping it separated is going to save you that much time if something does get corrupted.
Yeah.
But especially on the larger projects, if something does get corrupted, it's always good to have those incremental spots to go back to.
Yep. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, we can end this. And yeah, I'm open to any kind of feedback you want to give me, constructive criticism, if you want to phrase it like that. And let me know if you have any questions about any of this. We can get it worked out, hopefully. So thank you all.